Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, friend, Battlefield 2042 continues to have 2042 problems, but it seems like there might be some potential solutions coming from you. Now, I know a lot of people have shed off this game, not playing it as much as they were. Even at launch, it was a bit all over the place, and there are some rumors of it potentially going free to play. But what do you think? What have you got?
Dude, Battlefield 2042 is such a strange game. Like, I've played it for over 60 hours at this point, which I know is probably nowhere near the amount that other people watching this video have put into it. But 60 hours for me, I feel like I've gotten a good grasp on it. And honestly, there's a lot I actually really like about this game. You know, I've obviously played it for this long for a reason. You know, the moment-to-moment gameplay I think is really solid. When you get in a good flow in a match, it can be really good. I like the added scale of 128 players. There is something there, is what I'm trying to say. There is something at the core of Battlefield at the moment that is good. But it does have a lot of problems, and a lot of that comes down to the lack of longevity and the seeming lack of plan to keep players on board. Like you said, you know, so many people have jumped on, maybe had a good time, but then immediately dropped off. And that's for a multitude of reasons, in my opinion. And I kind of want to go through some of the fixes that I would implement to kind of like turn this game around, or at least give it a fighting chance to attract the same kind of longevity that Battlefield 1 had, that Battlefield 4 had, that even Battlefield 5 had after that disappointing launch. I think, if anything, Battlefield 5 can prove that a disappointing Battlefield game out the gate doesn't have to be disappointing forever. You know, fixes can be made to turn it around. And I think one of
DICE, you got like Battlefront 2 was like one of the biggest 180s in history, so it's not like they haven't done it before.
This is it. This is kind of like why I want to make this video, because I believe in this game, right? And I just want it to be good eventually, like you said there, Battlefront 2 was, like you said, Battlefield 5 was. And for me, one of the biggest issues I have just kind of centers around the maps in general. You know, there are some decent maps in there, but there are only a handful in the regular all-out war mode. And the issue is, Scott, you play those maps all the time, often in quick succession, because there isn't the ability to join a kind of playlist and just flow in one map into the next. Usually you can kind of like keep in the same lobby and hope it puts you in a team, but often I found personally that it doesn't find one very well, or you'll get in one with bots, or a lot of people leave, so you have to exit, you have to go back in, and then so many times it just throws you in the exact same map. So that just makes the game like so repetitive so quickly. But that's kind of compounded by a general lack of dynamism. Like, what I loved about all the Battlefield games is that even if there were only a handful of maps like there was for Bad Company 2 at launch, every time you played those maps, they would feel different, because you had the destruction, because you had so many players, because you had different flanks, because you had different ways to go through those levels, or, you know, progress those levels if you're playing Rush, going from one area to the next. They always felt dynamic. They always felt different. With 2042, though, the maps just kind of have this staticness to them. Every single time I jump in Orbital or something, or, you know, Orbital, you know, I just kind of feel like I'm getting the same experience every time. And while that experience, like I said, I really enjoyed for the first 40 hours or something, there are only so many times I can do that without being able to impact the flow of the mission. And it leads to what I know that you hate about this franchise, and that's running for a long time from one point to the next. That's not just this
franchise. That's just me in a battle royale, in anything. If I'm running more than I'm like interacting, I'm going to turn it off.
Totally, but it just sort of feels like those moments become more pronounced because the maps play the same, so you're always making the same runs, and then if you're dying the same way, it just kind of, it sucks the life out of it, and you feel like you've done this before. You feel like nothing is changing, nothing is really evolving, and you hit the same kind of choke points, you hit the same defenses that you just can't get over, and it kind of sucks, the fact that the maps don't have this dynamism to them. And I feel like that's also because of just like the way that they're designed. It's cool that they have this scale, right? It's cool that they have this verticality. You know, you've played it when you go up the skyscrapers, you're fighting up there, a tornado comes in, you jump off. Like, that's cool. That's a cool visual. But again, it's only a cool visual the first handful of times you do it. When you realize it is just a visual, when you realize that it doesn't really shake up the map in a substantial way, that's when it becomes a little bit frustrating for me. And the fact that you don't have these distinct and interesting areas in the maps themselves that can change, that is very frustrating. But I know you played a little bit of it. Did you encounter any of these issues with the map design when you were jumping in?
That's the thing, yeah. I mean, that was the thing. Even in the beta, like, obviously it was like a reduced amount of maps, but it felt incredibly repetitive as to what you were doing on them. Like, it is that carnal issue that I always have with, like I said, any game where I'm running more than I'm interacting, which I know is like a thing that you can kind of offset depending on different parts of the map that you might jump into. But like you said, they sold this big idea of this big physics sandbox. Look at these tornadoes. Look at this insane thing. We're stunning a jeep into a helicopter. We're well, all these different possibilities we're going to have. And then I feel like if they can't maintain that, obviously there's a technical side of it, but there's also the how are they encouraging you to experiment with this stuff in a franchise that is almost inherently more tactical, or at least more considerate of more. You're going to think your way through a map in a way that is almost opposite to the way that it was advertised. So they needed to bring that stuff together in a very specific way. And from day one, it always kind of felt like they weren't really nailing that anyway.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's part of the issue. It feels like a lot of the enjoyment that I get out of first-person shooters is not just in the kind of visceral thrill of headshotting a guy from 200 meters away. It's learning the maps in a way where I feel like I have an advantage because I understand the flow of them more, I understand the lanes of them more. And the thing with Battlefield 2042 is I've been playing the maps essentially the same way as I have been 10, 15 hours in. Like, nothing has changed about the way I tackle them, the way I think about them. And that just, again, adds to the sort of repetition of them. And I think that could be solved if DICE just kind of added in more points of interest, added in more lanes, and added in a bit more cover. Like, these maps are so open because of the added player count. But that can lead to issues where you just have two armies like sort of hitting each other on the top of like a peak, and it's like there's no way to kind of break through on your own, and that sucks. And combined with the lack of ambience in general, it just kind of, again, it feels static. Again, it feels more artificial than it should. You look at games like Battlefield 5, you look at games like Battlefield 1, and they have such a great sense of atmosphere. You've got these particle effects going off. You've got like a really lush art style that's really distinct. You've got these different lanes. You're going through trenches, you're going through houses. But in 2042, it looks quite good, in my opinion, for a game of this size, but you don't have that flow between different environmental hazards or environmental biomes that you had in other games, and it does, like I said, leave it feeling a little bit flat and a little bit static, like you're in a playground and you can sort of just see where it's been stitched together. It doesn't feel like funnily enough, we just did a video about open worlds and stuff. It doesn't feel like a lived-in world, which is weird, considering that it does have this narrative framing in the multiplayer, but that it doesn't really translate in the level design.
Overall, you might have this as a future point anyway, but I feel like overall with this one, they were really trying to just trim everything down. It's like, do more simplistic levels, or do more jump in and have fun style levels. Look at this crazy carnage that we're advertising on the side that you'll go and get up to. But then they, in pursuit of all that stuff, obviously there's all the operator things, there's all these different things that you can throw in, and that will be under the umbrella of a more casual approach. But I think if it affects the fundamentals in such a way, then you've arguably messed with the identity of the IP in a way that really needs to be addressed. And like, that's like, obviously that's something that you're saying has already been echoed like across the fandom regardless, because it is just such a noticeable change to how identifiable Battlefield used to be.
Totally. I mean, some of the changes that I know that people really don't like, I don't have a problem with. Like the specialists, I know people absolutely hate and would want to see them all like dead. like if they could kill all of the specialists, they probably would personally. For me, I don't mind that. I don't mind it when a game evolves in that way or takes a risk in that way. And to me, I quite enjoy using some of the specialists, especially the gadgets that come with them. But it is the fundamentals, like you said, it's the fundamentals of the map designs, the fundamentals of the combat, which just doesn't feel quite there. And I think part of what made me bounce off it after 60 hours is that eventually I kind of realized that I had no real autonomy in the matches themselves. Like, there are some things that you can do. You can try to take points, you can try to push with your team, but the solo experience is kind of not where other games were. You don't feel like you're necessarily having much of an impact on the map in a lot of ways, and that is down to like just the design of the game modes and the fact that there are so many players, so points are harder to take on your own or even with a few people. But it's also in the moment to gameplay as well. Like, one of the most disappointing things that I have with the game is the tiny little prompt that you get when you hit a vehicle with a rocket. Like, you get 10 XP, you get like a part damage pop-up, and it just feels so limp. It feels like you just hit it with like a BB gun, and that's so far away from me what Battlefield, how Battlefield used to make you feel, because you used to feel like you're part of this chaos, but that you're having an impact on the chaos. Like, if you hit the side of a tank I want it to feel impactful, even if it doesn't take it out. I'm not saying I should be able to destroy these things in one go, but it should feel like I've made a dent in it. It should feel like I've contributed something other than a measly 10 XP pop-up.
No, like the best experiences I ever had with Battlefield was that feeling of, I am a noticeably small cog, but I'm in a series of expanding cogs. And if I turn, then all these other things turn, and that's how we win. And I feel like if they mess with any part of that, or they're not rewarding those little small turns of the cog, or barely even acknowledging them, then that, like I said, it fundamentally affects the feel of the IP.
Precisely, it's exactly what you just said there. I'm not saying that I want to be able to, fundamentally change the entire flow of the game myself and be able to quickly capture points, but it's exactly what you said there. I want to be rewarded for those small contributions I do make, and I don't feel like I'm being rewarded in that way now. Like, I only get the Battlefield rush on like key moments or through very, very specific things where I managed to destroy a tank or something. And those moments are great. Those moments have made me have made me stick with it for this long, but they do need to come a little bit more often. It needs to feel like that it's rewarding your time a little bit more. And I just feel like with more focus on player impact, with more routes through levels, so you can get, behind enemies, or you can attack them in a different way rather than just doing the same thing over and over again, like that would be a little bit better. I think, I know you're gonna like this next point, I think, because this links with the kind of player progression in general, and I know there is another certain first-person shooter that you don't like the progression of at the moment, but for me, you'll notice it in a minute, but for me, when it comes to kind of leveling up in this game as well and having something to work towards, like the attachments, they're just kind of forgettable. They don't really add much to the actual gunplay. Yeah, totally. They don't add much to the gunplay. The weapons themselves, because the maps always play the same, like you don't feel encouraged to swap out what you've gotten used to, because you feel like there are specific zones for specific guns, and if you don't use them, you're just at a disadvantage, combined with some issues with balancing, and it just kind of feels like there's only a handful of guns to use. And when it comes to the long-term progression, again, it just feels like I don't know what I'm investing in. I don't know why I want to jump back on this grind when I've unlocked the stuff I want to unlock, and that's again a knock against its longevity.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, like the thing you're referencing is Halo Infinite, which obviously the progression in Infinite is entirely cosmetic, but overall it's still the same feeling of it not being rewarding. I think in Battlefield's case, it is those disparate elements where you should be having those instances in game of like, well, if I had this attachment, I would be able to do this, and they have that new thing where you can swap out your loadout on the fly. But if that's not being applied to viable scenarios, like I'm literally, like, if you were thinking, man, if I'd only unlocked this other scope, I'd be able to get that one guy or whatever it is, and that should then like fuel back or fold back into the overall progression. If those instances aren't there because everything just feels so aimless and messy and unrewarding, then it just further comes apart.
Totally. I mean, that's like a great system. The ability to change attachments on the fly, like, is awesome. It should make you a dynamic player. It should allow you to go from one area to the map to the other with the same weapon without dying, and be able to adapt to different areas. But I find that outside of a few guns, it doesn't really change much of anything. You'll stick with the same thing for the entire round, and you'll just kind of go with it. And that just like, it's just frustrating when there is a nugget of a good game there, and there is definitely a good time there, if you're jumping in for a few hours. It is just, again, like I'm saying, in the long term, like the roadmap for this game is more or less non-existent, and I think that's an issue as well. Like, jumping in now, I have no idea, again, what I'm working towards, because DICE have said that they're working on content. We know that the next season is going to start sometime early this year, but we don't know what that's going to necessarily, we don't know what the next content drop is going to look like. We don't know what the roadmap for this game is. We know that new operators are coming, we know that there's going to be new maps and stuff, but I feel like now, after a few months with the players dropping off, we need kind of something there. We need a promise of something to look forward to, like, it's the kind of an issue that happened with Anthem. When that game came out, they were like, don't worry, we've got this roadmap, don't worry, we've got Anthem 2.0, but outside of like a few talking points and a few vague promises, no one really knew what they had to look forward to, and then obviously Anthem 2.0 didn't even end up happening. And I kind of feel like we're maybe in this similar situation here where EA and DICE are going, look, we've got content plan, look, we've got these plans, but they're not talking about these plans. They're not revealing what these are.
Like you said, there's the rumor that it potentially goes free to play, which obviously would get a lot of people back in. Also, if you're on Game Pass, you can do, I think it's the first 12 hours, you can do a chunk of hours as part of the EA Play Pass, unless that's been retired by now, but that was there at launch. But my point is that if they go free to play, if they find some way to spike the player numbers, they need to make sure that the version of the game people are coming back into is different and is massively improved from what they had before. So maybe they're staying quiet because they're about to drop some sizable patch, Cyberpunk style, change a whole bunch of things, and announce a different financial model or a different way for people to play more. And maybe that's why they're going radio silent. But it's rarely good to not keep your audience informed, especially when we're making videos like this. It is a constant conversation happening because it is one of the biggest shooter franchises or biggest entertainment franchises of the modern day.
Totally. I mean, like, they have come out there, and admittedly, I'm not just saying that they've done a completely bad job. They quickly got patches turned around before Christmas. They've already announced new patches have gone live. Like, that stuff is like really good. Like, that stuff is really welcome. But that stuff's just kind of fixing what was broken to begin with. It's not looking ahead at new content or content that would change the kind of fundamental issues that I think are there right now. The meta. Some would call it a meta, Scott Taylor, but some crafty gamers out there would call it the meta game. But yeah, just overall, it's a game that I love a lot about. It's a game that I will continue to play. It just could be better. It just should be better. It just baffles me that they didn't learn the lessons of Battlefield 5 and they've kind of like gone backwards in a lot of areas. I would still recommend it to people who want to jump in as a team, who don't mind who don't need it to be a 200-hour experience. But for those people who want to play this until the next Battlefield comes out, it's lacking in that regard. Like, I don't see myself sticking with Battlefield 2042 until the sequel comes out. Like, I just don't see it having those legs at the moment, and that's what I want to see change.
That's also what I wonder if they do just, wipe the table and go again. Like, we'll just do a Battlefield 7 or whatever the hell it ends up being called, or 6 or whatever number we're on for the main canon thing, because that would be the EA approach of just like, well, we tried this, it didn't work, let's just go again, and we'll see how that goes. But let us know what you think down in the comments below of Battlefield 2042. How much have you been playing it, and have you enjoyed some of the patches that have come so far? What are your wider thoughts on how it can be improved for the long-term future? For now, though, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.